So for my first video, I thought I would start at the beginning, and when you start at the beginning of any Rails application, you type Rails new and give it a name, and I'm just going to give it the name neuroatypical, which is harder to spell than you'd think. Anyway, I also tend to work I tend to work in Postgres from the beginning, so that usually your first deployment is going to be to Heroku, which is, free to a certain point, and it works in Postgres. So I just work in Postgres from the beginning, and while it's not a huge thing, you may think about long term when you're starting your application, if you're going to write any sort of raw SQL as part of your application because you have multiple joins or something complicated that Active Record can't handle, each SQL-based database will have slightly different tweakage, and slightly different verbiage for the same thing. So if you know what you're going to use from the beginning, you don't have to fix it later. I also use the -T modifier so that it will not install the default testing, because as you'll see, I prefer to work in RSpec with Capybara. All the tutorials I've ever done, partially or completely, that did involve testing, starting with the Michael Hartle one, start with RSpec, or at least it used to. As I understand it now, he's moved over to the default version, but I learned RSpec, and I like RSpec because I like the fact that it's more, with Capybara, it's more English. And it's just what I learned, and it's how I work. So you create your new application, all the default things are created, and then you move into your folder. My next step is to put in a few gems that I always used. I use Sublime Text, and I followed the directions when I first installed Sublime Text a while ago to create a keyboard shortcut. If you don't know, the dot just means open the whole folder as it is, and you'll see Sublime Text opens everything. There's neuroatypical, and you can see there are all the default folders. I'm not going to go over all the folders that a Rails application creates, because the idea in this is just more to have people possibly see how I work and maybe take something from it, or take encouragement that, it's not as easy as other tutorials will make it look. This is the default Rails file, gem file. And I always add a few gems from the beginning that I know I'm always going to use. And to make sure I get the right ones, I go to rubygems.org and I'll look them up. So I'll start with Bootstrap, which, it works. Twitter makes it. It's fully functional. I know that this is 3.3 and they recently released 4. Maybe the gem for 4 doesn't exist yet. I'm comfortable with 3. You'll see later on that user interface, user experience design is not my strong suit, so Bootstrap helps. I work with Font Awesome Rails because it does provide some of the things I like when you have the little buttons that have the plus or the trash can or all that, and it integrates really well with default Rails link to stuff to create the buttons with the Font Awesome stuff on the left without having to write any additional CSS, which I greatly appreciate. Then I have to install a few default gems for testing. Those who are more experienced than me will notice as I do this that there are things you will think I need that are not being installed. For instance, you may go, why isn't he installing Database Cleaner? Because you don't need Database Cleaner immediately. If you're doing your test-driven development and you're going to start off small with your basic CRUD, you don't need it right away. Factory Girl is extremely helpful, especially in the beginning with your CRUD testing when you want to test any form entry and validations. It allows you to create, with a little tweaking from the default, as many instances of an object as you want, so you can test a variety of things. In addition, I add a few things purely in the test environment, which you'll notice Rails does not have any reason to set up from the beginning, so you have to set it up yourself, and that is where I put Capybara, which is the gem I use for the, as it says here, it's a integration testing tool used for rack-based web applications. It simulates how a user would interact with a website. Basically, it allows you to write if you haven't used it before, you can say click this, click that, visit this, visit that, and it will simulate it. In addition, I also use shoulda matchers, which does a variety of things. Primarily, I just use it in model testing to work on validations. I know that it has more functions than that, but it is those functions that I need. Additionally, I don't know if it's required, but it's helpful if you force a specific Ruby on your application in case other people are going to use it, then everybody is working in the same Ruby environment, which on open source projects I would expect is extremely helpful. So you hit save, and then you go back to your command line where you created it, and you're going to hit bundle, and I'm aware that an error is coming, but I just want to work through it. It's going to tell me my Ruby current global version is 2.3, and my gem file specified 2.0. 2.4.0, so using RBNV, I'm just going to change the local Ruby to 2.4, so this folder will work in 2.4. And then I can run my bundle, and it will install all my gems. Now, you'll see that nothing new got installed because, well, this is my 6th attempt to do this properly, and all those gems that I needed have been installed. So then you want to create your databases, which you have to do when you're using Postgres or MySQL, which you don't have to do with SQLite. I recently discovered this command, Rails DB create, which will go through the whole process for you. I used to just use the Postgres create DB command line. This saves a little bit of time because it creates both of them at once. And then you want to set up your RSpec. Now, depending on your level of learning, you may think that you have to type out generate every time. You actually don't. You can just type Rails G. G stands for generate, and obviously if you ever want to delete something going backwards, you just use D for delete. So RSpec comes with some built-in installations, and Rails G RSpec install will set up the folders you need for testing, hopefully, and there you go. So that's my basic environment. I haven't created anything yet, but it's set up to work the way I want to do it. And then the last thing you should do, because version control is always a good idea, is first you type git init, which will initiate your repository. Then you type git add dot, because nothing's added. So in the beginning, you're going to track everything. And so it was added. And then you're going to go git commit -m, and I just say initial setup complete. And it's going to add all your stuff. So now everything is tracked, and everything is in version control. Now, you could create a GitHub or whatever Git repository you use if you want to, but that is not what I'm going to get into now, because this was just about A, testing to see if this works and how well I can do it, and B, to see my general setup so that anybody who comes in later can get an idea where my starting point is. I hope this was enjoyable to everyone, or anyone who's reading this, and if you have anything to say, just drop a comment.